Yes. So I think it is recording now. All good your side? Yes. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. So last week we introduced the Thristy Cities project and also heard from our project lead, Ted Veldkamp. And today we'll have the second ClimateCafe in the series presented on this research project. We'll be hearing from a few experts as they share their perspectives on urban drought and how this initiative is paving the way for cities to better adapt to a drier future. So just for those of you who weren't here last week, the Thristy Cities project is a collaborative project that aims to explore both the drivers but also the impacts of drought in urban settings while focusing on creating forward-thinking solutions that make our cities more drought resilient. So today we'll hear more about the project, particularly in terms of water users, urban green adaptation measures, and drought resilience strategies. So our first speaker is Floris Boergaert. I don't think he needs a lot of introduction, but Floris is the professor in climate adaptation at the Hanse University of Applied Sciences. His general research and advice fields include sustainable urban management and nature-based solutions, and bridging the gap between research and practice, and therefore also helping cities become more resilient and implement real-world strategies to better cope with the challenges of drought, heat, and heavy rainfall. So there's a lot I can still say and introduce Floris, but yeah, Floris, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Then I will start sharing. So I will have a very short presentation, but on the topic, of course, Thristy Cities and what you actually can do. And this is quite new, actually very new, because it's not published yet, but it will be published next week. I just want to show this publication that I did with Charnay and also Roelof Stuurman, just to set the scene a bit on what you can do. Because drought is, of course, about the urban groundwater recharge techniques, and there's quite a lot of doubts on how many techniques there are. We found about 25 plus, and I'm not going to, of course, go in detail. That's not the main issue, but just flagging this publication made for the Thristy Cities, as you can see in the acknowledgement. So as you quite aware, there are lots of nature-based solutions that we can use to infiltrate water. These are in Dutch, but of course the publication is in English, and it just flags that we can model, design, maintain a lot of these nature-based solutions in order to get more water, in this case stormwater, into the ground as a mitigation for drought and lowering groundwater tables, mostly in the urban areas. So you saw just a print screen of the CRC tool, KBS tool, Klimaatbestendige Stad in Dutch, and with a mix of another platform, ClimateScan, and of course there are a lot of nature-based solution platforms, as you can see here. We try to make the connection of practical examples from 25 plus of the most used mitigation for groundwater drought solutions. So how that works is basically this is an EU publication about ClimateScan. As you can see, it ticks a lot of boxes. That's how it has a lot of locations and a lot of examples that can help a lot of people. And the publication, I'm not going to go in detail, but flags constructed wetlands with infiltration. So on the left, you see a symbol of the constructed wetland. In the middle, you see an example, in this case, the Erasmusgracht in Amsterdam, and also the link where you can find more info on the design and also how it's maintained. There's some monitoring figures as well, and the QR code that if you like that picture and you want to implement an infiltration facility like this that also purifies the water, you can find with the QR codes thousands of examples around the world. So that's how it works. Also beneath, that's the deep groundwater infiltration, as you can see with an example in Rotterdam. So every slide which you see here, and of course it's not only Dutch, there's a bioswale here in Suriname, the first one actually, and also permal pavement of grass grid pavers. in St. Lucia. So it's all around the world with the target to show that these examples already exist and that you can find a lot of examples around the world. So New Orleans also with permal porous pavement. One of the biggest, nice city in the world, of course, Nijverdal, with a great rain garden, infiltration boxes in the middle in Groningen, perforous pipes, in this case in Amsterdam, and again, a lot of QR codes that you can find more example if you like that method. It should be maybe added with some definitions, but I think that the pictures speak for themselves. French drains, biopori, that's quite new in Europe, actually being used in Indonesia. It's basically a perforated pipe, vertical in the ground, and they do a lot of food waste in it. So that entitles that there's a lot of worms in it, and therefore it stays open. It will be quite nice to implement that also. So just going further, deep infiltration, recreation fields. You also see a water square in Den Bosch, which is quite example, not the only one in the world. You can find, hundreds of water squares around the world. Then there's a private green garden in Vancouver, for example, quite large, being maintained by residents. It's quite a great example around the world. And then there's service drains, of course, which you can find rainwater harvesting. And if there's a surplus, it will infiltrate to the ground. So being a solution also for drought. And then there's tree pits, sometimes very small, sometimes very large, and also tree pits with infiltration boxes. In this case, Groningen with 35 new trees on the central market is being flagged down. Then also the use of treated water. This is grey water actually in Drielanden. Is being used. Also infiltration trenches. This one is in the Philippines. As you can see, also rainwater detention ponds can be found all over the world with the benefit of purifying stormwater as well. Urban parks. So as you can see, we can go on and on. Infiltration shafts, a bit different than the biopore, for example, and a lot of more examples. So I went through it very quickly, but the aim of this this publication is to show that there are many ways to get water in the ground and be measures of drought. And then there's also the ClimateScan link with locations, because it's fine that it's designed and implemented, but we have to know if it actually functions. So we also are gathering for the Thristy City project locations that have been measured. And those locations get a medal, as you can see in the left bottom. So that's it for now. It will be published next week. I will spread it around for everyone that is interested in this. And I hope this just is a beginning of this session and flagging what is possible on measures. And of course, there are more. And if you know more, it will be great for the second edition. That's it for me, within time, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm always amazed at the extent of projects on ClimateScan, and it just keeps on growing and growing, and the contributions are just incredible from all over the world. So I think it's an incredible source of data.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. 20,000 projects already. Yeah, exceeded. So that's quite Yeah. Thanks.
Should we ask you questions now, or because you're going to leave earlier?
Yeah, if there are any questions.
That does have questions? Joe? Your speaker's off?
Because it's groundwater recharge, what do you do about controlling the quality of the water I get excited about motorway runoff. Yeah. You wouldn't want to put motorway runoff into most of those devices, would you?
No, exactly. Yeah, so in this picture, you didn't see a motorway. Yeah, mostly this is in the urban area. Still, there's a risk, of course. Also in the residential areas or commercial areas, there might be a large amount of pollutants, so heavy metals, polyaromatic hydrocarbons as well. So when there's a risk, and that's mostly not measured, regrettably. So there's still a risk, of course, because it's very hard to predict the stormwater quality. But mostly when there's a expected risk, Some of these measures are preferred. So that's the halophyte filters, so the constructed wetlands, for example. Also the bioswales, they are known to capture a lot of the micropollutants, so polyaromatic hydrocarbons and heavy metals. But still some of the pollutants, so that might be de-icing salt or pesticides, which sometimes is used. Yeah, there are they have a very low removal efficiency in these premises, so there's still risk. So indeed, not on motorways, not on industrial areas, but in the urban area, these are used mostly. And I think the only ones, the deep well, so that's in the Netherlands, that's about 20 meters. That's quite danger. I wouldn't do that with any other purification before the water goes in the ground, because indeed it's a risk for our drinking water quality or nature, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, in England, there are regulations about what you can put into deep soakage boreholes. So, and I'm not sure about the tube full of food waste.
No. Why? Because it might clog, or
well, no,
maybe...
just because we've got loads of constraints on nutrient pollution in England at the moment, and putting food waste into the ground would be. It depends where you were going to do it, but I mean it's a great idea, and I love worms, but you'd have to. That would be quite a hard sell.
I thought it was quite interesting because we saw a lot of it in gardens in Indonesia, and we don't do it in the Netherlands, probably for the same reasons you mentioned as well. But we do put compost in soil. So
but we put the food waste in a vessel above ground, and then wait for it to break down, and then we put it on the soil. We don't actually put the food waste into the soil. That's
it might be too direct. Well,
no, let's give it a try.
That's an interesting point about trying to make it applicable, because it's about the cycle of the nutrients themselves. And maybe, I'm not sure, I'm just guessing here, in Indonesia they have a high productive system and they're just not really scared about there's already a lot of nutrients going around. But that might actually be a reason to try it somewhere or don't try it somewhere, depending on the system you're working in.
Yeah, I'm sure we could try it. Because it's a concentrated location for nutrients.
Exactly.
So you could grow something around it, couldn't you? And it would thrive.
And you could put worms in it anyway. You don't need food necessarily. Well, for a little bit for the worms, but not that much.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, thank you, Floris.
Thanks.
So our second speaker today is Vincent Merks. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So he's a leading researcher at Naturalis Biodiversity Center in the Netherlands, and his work focuses on plant evolution and biodiversity, with a special interest in how plants adapt to extreme environments. And Vincent brings a unique perspective to our conversation today, combining deep scientific expertise with a great understanding of the natural world and within the context of climate change. Vincent, I hope that was accurate enough. So over to you.
Thank you. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So indeed, I became the scientific director of Naturalis. I'm also a professor at the University of Amsterdam, and indeed, I am a green guy. I am very much interested in biodiversity, right? And if you think about biodiversity in cities, actually, of course, biodiversity has a very, very important role for the health of our cities, for our own health, for the health of our ecosystems. And so basically, the green infrastructures in cities is really an essential part of our environment. Obviously, these green infrastructures is also threatened by many, many different stressors in the cities, including drought. If you think about green infrastructures in cities, we mainly think about trees. And obviously, trees did not evolve to live in a city, right? They evolved to live in a forest. And so the city itself is already a quite stressful environment. I'm always amazed when I look at city trees and you actually know the age, so you know when they were planted. They often, they are way, way less developed than in their natural habitat. So it is already a really stressful environment for trees, and Yeah, external stressors like drought obviously only make the situation worse. And that's of course not so good for the green infrastructure itself and for the function it delivers, but also it leads to high costs. I've been talking to many city ecologists and replacing trees and replanting them. If branches break off and after storms, rotten trees and things like that, it really delivers a high cost. So it's really essential to look for solutions to have the most kind of healthy green infrastructure. Now, one of the challenges in that is if we think about plants and particularly about trees, we often focus on what happens above ground, right? But actually, if you think about the health of a tree, probably the most important part of the organism is actually the part that you cannot see, which are the roots. And the root systems of trees are quite extensive. Roots can go as far from the trunk as the tree is high. Pretty extensive root systems. And of course, these roots, they can help the tree to take up nutrients from the soil and also water. But they do not do that alone. Basically, these roots are growing into the soil, and the soil is an enormous reservoir for microbes and for all kinds of biodiversity, also microscopic biodiversity. And this biodiversity is really, really important for the health of the plants and trees in particular. It is very familiar. It's very similar to our own gut microbiome. So we have a lot of microbes in our guts, and they help us to take up nutrients. But at the same time, they have a really important role in our immune system. And it's exactly the same with trees. And this is a component that is actually never taken into account. Because it's often not even realized, I think that soil is actually a living environment. Soil is alive. Actually, if you look at biodiversity on Earth, the majority of species on Earth live in the soil. So soil is the most biodiverse kind of structure or environment that you can find on the planet. And the biodiversity is really mind-blowing. If you think about a teaspoon of soil, also from your garden or even under the pavement, it can easily contain more than 1,000 species. Well, why are there so many species there? Well, because they are really small. So it's a lot of bacteria, fungi, small soil animals, but they are all part of this whole ecosystem. And this ecosystem also interacts with the trees, and together they kind of form this environment, which, if it's really optimized, it can also be quite resilient to stressors. We know very little actually about this biodiversity into the soil, and that's because it's very difficult to study. You cannot even see it, most of these organisms, with your own eyes. But luckily now we have techniques to at least kind of visualize it and recognize the species that are there, and that's based on DNA. All these organisms, they have genetic material, DNA. You can extract that from a soil sample, and you can basically read the DNA using modern techniques, and that gives you an idea of the species that are present. And this is something that we generally do at Naturalis. That we have also done based basically on city trees. This is a study that was recently published on Dutch elm species of Dutch elm trees in Amsterdam, and we sampled soil and roots around trees that were growing in the street. For example, the Keizersgracht. We sampled the same species of trees in a park, Vondelpark in this case, and also as a comparison around the forest. And so you get these very diverse communities, which you basically don't look at individual species, but you look basically at the community composition, and you see these three colors that you see in these graphs. They represent these three kind of habitats for these trees, and you see that they are different from each other. And so it's not random. It's not random what microbes are present. It's obviously determined by spatial factors, by soil factors, but also by and the environment itself. And so this also means, and that's quite important, this is just a pattern, of course, that you potentially can steer this. You can influence what kind of microorganisms are present at a particular site by using particular soils and by influencing basically this environment. And so that is something that we are going to do within the Thristy Cities project. We are going to look at these patterns of soil biodiversity in relation to tree health and also in relation to drought. But of course, in order to really see how can we steer this, we also need experiments. And so in one part of the project, we will also really do experiments where we can test what kind of factors are the most efficient to kind of influence this microbiome, and how does that kind of translate to an increased resilience of the trees to water stress. And by combining these kind of real world patterns with experimental data from the laboratory, we hope to get a bit more insights and actually to how this system works and how it reacts to drought, to ultimately come to also kind of real measures that you can take to influence this soil biodiversity and ultimately also the health and the drought resilience of the trees that we are studying. So that was in a nutshell, quite short, I think. I hope about what we are going to do within the Thristy Cities project.
Yes. Thank you. Very interesting. It really puts it into perspective when you have that illustration of a teaspoon, and you said 1,000 different organisms. That's incredible.
Yes.
Just a question. So you say soil, the types of soil would, for instance, have an influence on the microorganisms, but would the types of vegetation, so the species of trees, maybe there's alien vegetation, that kind of thing, would that also have an influence on the composition of microorganisms in that area?
Absolutely. So yes, and that's one of the things that you can actually steer. Which plants do you, of course, plant there? And of course, the plants themselves already have a certain resilience to, for example, drought. And then you can choose species that are maybe more resilient. But at the same time, so of course, there is a species identity kind of influence on these microbiomes. So yes, every species has kind of their own. There is a lot of overlap, but if you for example look in a forest, it will be the species composition will actually be important. And what is quite interesting, our very recent results we are getting just from natural forest, is that the kind of ground vegetation, so the herbs and the smaller, so the understories, as we say it in biology, species, they influence this also a lot. So a forest, for me, it's not just a collection of trees. It's also the herbs that are growing have a lot of influence on these microbiomes. So that is also something that we should, I think, start to take into account, not just plant single trees, but kind of whole ecosystems in which also these kind of understory and herb-like plants play an important role.
Yeah, makes sense. I've heard like you can plant certain herbs and stuff that repel mosquitoes or flies or whatever. So it makes perfect sense that it will also have an influence on the microorganisms. Yeah. Thris.
Yeah, I was wondering, great presentation. Indeed, the spoon did it for me as well. But so in the Thristy Cities, because location would matter as well, do you already know where are you going to take measurements or monitoring or maybe testing? Can you tell something more about that?
Yeah, so I think we are going to measure at multiple levels, and of course, we are going to do these measurements in in kind of the test sites that are foreseen, right, in Eindhoven and Rotterdam. So I don't have a lot of exactly information on how these will look like and stuff like that, but of course, there we are going to measure. And based on what we measure there, we are going to do the experiments, right? So we will use the same species of trees, and so that will be like very detailed. And of course, I mean, in these measurements, we will need also a control and things like that. So have to be really designed well, I think. At the same time, we want to do also kind of a national sampling. And this links actually to another project I'm involved in, the Identity Project, which in Naturalis, we basically want to sample all the soil in the Netherlands and have a complete overview of what is actually there. And so as part of the Thirsty Cities project, basically in all of the cities that are in this consortium, we will do measurements throughout the cities, right? So we will generate a lot of data, and that will also allow us to kind of extrapolate the results we are getting in these small scale experiments. We will try to extrapolate that to other cities as much as possible, because we will have data from a much wider variety of systems.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, thanks.
Interesting. Sydney?
So yeah, thank you. Very nice presentation. But I was wondering, you're talking about that first you're going to do the measurement, so identifying the communities, and after that you're going to do experiments with inoculation of different communities or species groups, right? But I already. Do you already have like sets or communities ready that you would like to test, or is it purely based on, are we going to measure and then see what we miss basically, or are you going to figure it out along the way, and how are you going to determine which kind of inoculation mixtures you're gonna add? Is it purely species based, or is it a bit broader?
No, well, it will probably not be species based, because basically if you would really want to add individual microbes, you have to kind of grow them, right? You have to produce them, and that's quite complicated. And so we envision, so basically we need to measure different things. And also in these experiments, one of the ideas would be, okay, but the perspective is drought, right? And so we will measure that in the field, but at the same time in the laboratory, we can actually use tree seedlings, and not adult trees, unfortunately, but and different soil mixtures. And therefore, I'm very much interested, for example, in what cities. I know, for example, the city of Amsterdam has actually tested, right, several different soils they can commercially obtain, and that influences this microbiome. And so that's something that we can test. And we can see, okay, these different soil mixtures, how do these plants react to the same drought stress, and which is the optimal combination. And then there is actually a second, so that is the kind of the effect of the drought. And then there is the steering, which basically is a separate experiment. It's a kind of follow-up, like how can you kind of get to a particular community. That's much more challenging, I must say. And so ideally you don't really inoculate, but you kind of have you influence the circumstances in such a way that this particular community will arrive there.
Yeah, and then we're going back in soil composition or plant mixtures, or maybe other factors exactly. That we'll find. So it's more about steering which communities will grow more than really adding them.
Yes.
All right. Nice.
Angus?
Hi, very interesting presentation, and you already partly answered my question, because I was very much interested in how the composition changes over time, and indeed cities use different kinds of mixtures of soil. You already partly did a research on in Amsterdam. Are you also going to investigate it in this research, and also the effect of trees on the composition then? Because you have two variables. One is the type of tree you plant, and the other one is the type of soil mixture that you're implementing.
That's a very good question. It gets complicated very fast, right? Because all of the combinations. My hope is basically that for the experiments, we will probably focus on a single tree species. Otherwise, it gets quite complex. And then we vary, the variables are like the different soil mixtures, but let's see about that, or just very few tree species. But for our kind of pattern detection over the Netherlands, we will be exhaustive, right? So we will basically include everything. And there the hope is, by just having lots and lots of data, you can start to kind of figure out the influence of each individual parameter. I mean, you must probably have a lot of samples, but within that project, we can have 75,000 samples, so it's quite a lot of samples. So yeah, but it's true. I think within the experiments themselves, we will probably focus just on a single or maybe 2, 3 species. Yeah.
Very interesting. And to add a variable, the pavement above it, how permeable is it? How much oxygen can that enter through the pavement, or how much water, and how that influences the composition as well?
Yeah, that's very interesting actually, and that influences a lot. So I've been involved in another project, Hidden Biodiversity, which is another NWA project, and they actually looked into that. And then it's very nice to see they also sampled over different cities in the Netherlands, and basically the sample really cluster by how much it's covered, right? So all under the asphalt, whether it's in Rotterdam or in Amsterdam, they will be similar. Whether it is an open tree pit, it would be more similar. So that's quite interesting, because it also means that basically we have a lot of influence over it, right?
Yeah.
So we can really influence it. It doesn't matter almost. It's a bit of a stretch, but where you are in the Netherlands, what soil you have, but it's what you do that really is. So that's actually quite promising, I think.
So, and what will have the biggest effect? The biome that you're adding to the tree as an experiment, or changing the surface?
Well, that's a very good question. For sure, the biggest effect is always the local conditions, right? So you can add a microbiome, but if it doesn't like, it will not, it will lose, right? The microbes will die. So I think adding is always very difficult. If the conditions are not correct, you're not going to be able to really steer it. So you always have to change the conditions. And then what is more important, that I'm not sure about. I think the kind of coverage is quite important, but also the soil. And for microbes, for example, one of the prime factors is always pH. pH so is really, really important. And I mean, you can influence pH to many different things. But yeah, it's something that we will hopefully also figure out if we do all these measurements across the Netherlands.
Or to the first results then.
Yeah.
A lot of variables. Sydney?
Yeah, I was wondering what data is useful as an addition to your research, because you're going to do a DNA analysis, of course, that already comes in many different forms. But there are many, I already hear you talking about many other cities that are gathering data, and you're really enthusiastic about it. And for instance, the upcoming of eDNA analysis is in the Netherlands, for instance, is coming up already. And we're also doing that in Nijmegen, but I'm always wondering, like, yeah, is this like especially for eDNA, of course, but is this the correct data that is useful for this kind of research? So is it really specific that you need your own data collection via your own samples, or is our general community indications also useful?
I mean, you can. One of the challenges with eDNA is that I think there is many different methods, and if you change, there is many different ways to do it, and it becomes easily difficult to compare between different approaches, right? And actually, the one of the main drivers behind this identity project is to have one very standardized way of analyzing and sampling and analyzing these samples, so that everything becomes comparable. That does not mean that you cannot compare it with data that has been generated with another pipeline. It becomes a little bit more tricky to make these comparisons, but it's not impossible. But it is indeed a challenge, and how to integrate these data into like other data streams. That's actually, I mean, this project is going to be an excellent test case for this, right? Because that's actually the idea. Okay, we can now finally generate this eDNA data. We know a bit about the soil biodiversity, and so it's an extra data layer. And in work package 4, so that will be the challenge, right? So how can we kind of integrate this? And then the ultimate thing is it actually useful? Maybe it doesn't tell me us so much. Maybe if you know the soil parameters, you know enough. Possible, right? It's really a test case. So yeah, I'm very curious, but it's going to be a real world example. Okay, we can now generate this data. Does it tell us something, and can it help us to achieve a more drought-resistant green infrastructure? So, yeah, it's a nice test case, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I think that's any more questions for Vincent before we go on? Okay, so our third and last speaker is me. And I'm a researcher at the Hanse, and my work focuses on the impacts of climate change and developing and implementing climate resilient measures and adaptation strategies. And I do have a civil engineering background, but I love looking at how we can integrate traditional infrastructure with urban green solutions and ultimately help cities also become more drought resilient or just resilient to climate change. So let me just share my presentation. Yes, you can see it on your side. Okay, great.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to give you an overview of our involvement in the project and our general kind of research areas that we look at the Hanse. So we know that under the force of climate change, we will see more droughts and floods, and these events are, of course, also predicted to become more severe in future. And from the graph on the left, we can see a significant trend of rainfall shortages and droughts, and similar data on the right, just more in relation to location in the Netherlands in 2025. So the picture is looking quite grim. So of course, this effect also has a lot of consequences, but we also recognize that both shortage as well as an abundance of water is very much exacerbated by urbanization and creates significant risks in terms of urban resilience and sustainability. So for example, if we have floods or simply just normal runoff conditions, this water is no longer able to infiltrate the soil due to impermeable surfaces, which then reduces infiltration, aquifer recharge, groundwater recharge for later extraction during times of water shortages. So then also worsening water shortage and droughts. So the Thristy Cities research project will look at drought resilience from a holistic approach. So that includes a comprehensive look at different aspects related to water users, the water budget, demands, drought risk, and it's relevant to a particular case study area. And we will, of course, also consider the design and implementation of adaptation measures and urban green strategies that consider drought vulnerability and risk and determine the best selection of appropriate measures in that particular study area. So climate adaptation measures and urban green strategies is an area of climate change research particularly relevant to our research group at the Hanse, which therefore also very closely aligns with the research project of Thristy Cities. So I'd like to give some background on these adaptation measures and draw your attention to urban green strategies that will be considered within the urban environment of our case study in Groningen. So this illustration of climate adaptation strategies helps to show how these approaches basically contribute to the creation of a more drought resilient urban space. Some measures are introduced with targeted benefits, such as the reduction of runoff and floods, but at the same time, they also ensure water retention, infiltration, improvement of the water cycle. The text is a bit small, but it all describes it in detail, looking at water quality, groundwater recharge, and all of these also then supplement water sources to be reused during times of water scarcity or droughts. So although we aren't focusing on floods in this project, these measures go hand in hand and address challenges on both sides of water surplus and water deficits. And we also test these measures at our climate testing ground. This living lab is located in Groningen on campus and provides a first-hand look at the performance of these measures. And this is obviously under controlled conditions. So for example, we've constructed bioswales. You can see on the photo to your right how this retention system is flooded, and then we test infiltration capacity. During these tests, we also use wireless self-logging pressure transducers to measure and record the reduction in water levels over time. And these kind of measures, of course, also facilitate infiltration, groundwater recharge, and storage for use during droughts. So permeable paving and permeable asphalt might not seem as relevant to droughts, but these measures, coupled with like underground storage units, for instance, also support water reuse strategies that help reduce demand, particularly during droughts. Yeah, you can, for instance, see how these installations are tested on our climate testing ground. And beneath this area, we also have quite a large water storage area. And if I remember correctly, this water is also reticulated and used in the nearby building. Another installation at the climate testing facility, the water wall. It reduces drainage capacities and strain on infrastructure while also storing water for later reuse. And we also find that through community awareness, these installations have been put up at private residences within the Groningen area. Rain gardens, just another example that provides a buffer for stormwater while allowing infiltration, subsurface storage for groundwater, and through this process, it also enhances soil moisture and the urban water cycle. The photo on the left was taken in Assen, close to Groningen, but in the province. And the one on the right is also an installation at the climate testing ground. So all of these measures together also help with storing water underground. And it's an opportunity for instance, cooling squares that are, of course, helpful during droughts to cool the urban environment and reduce heat stress during the summer months. In the background, you can also see the green wall, which is also a really nice nature-based solution to implement against climate change and climate adaptation. So, of course, there's also many other greening strategies that support the water cycle, water storage and water reuse. These are all photos from Groningen as well, and they reduce the demand on water and alleviate the risk of droughts as well. And in addition, there are also many non-targeted co-benefits and ecosystem services provided by these climate adaptation measures, since they contribute to various other urban planning strategies such as runoff, flood reduction, biodiversity, urban heat, the list goes on. So in ClimateScan, you can see these projects. Took all these photos of ClimateScan together with 20,000 other projects all over the world. So we have quite an extensive database that includes hundreds of drought resilient measures and adaptation strategies that we will also use to feed data into the Thristy Cities project. On this illustration, for instance, you can see both drought problems. It's not just solutions and measures, but it's problems and also solutions that's been added by contributors all over the world contributing to ClimateScan. And of course, we don't just look at the good side, we also consider what deficiencies there are in these measures. So selecting the most suitable drought resilient measures and adaptation strategies, and also how we could make these measures more resilient to the impacts of climate change and more specifically drought. These I just focused on green walls to illustrate this point. And yeah, just 4 examples, they're all from ClimateScan that are obviously not resilient. And I know for a fact the one in the bottom left-hand corner was a direct consequence of water shortage during the Day Zero event in Cape Town in 2018. It was actually installed during 2018 when the drought started. It's in Buitengrachtstraat and it has 2 problems basically. It uses potable water, which was illegal to use for gardening during that time. And second of all, the plants aren't drought resilient. So looking at these types of challenges, we can look at lessons learned and determine what steps we can take to make sure that these measures we implement remain effective for their intended purposes. So to illustrate how climate change will contribute to data acquisition and how we will also use it in Thristy Cities to get at least some basic information, I would like to show you an example of an existing project in Groningen relating to climate adaptation and drought resilience. and this is the tree project at the Grote Markt. It's an urban greening initiative that integrates large mature trees into the urban area using innovative underground system for water management and water storage. Yes, so the two photos on the left-hand side illustrates the special soil and crate systems that has been installed to improve root growth, oxygenation, and resilience in the city's heavy clay ground. And this smart tree planting or smart soil planting is also part of the Thristy Cities project, as Vincent also mentioned, so it's particularly relevant. And the two photos on the right just show some students monitoring long-term temperature trends and infiltration capacities with a double ring infiltrometer. So some steps have been taken, as we can see from the news article as well. There are some ambitious plans in Groningen for the future. However, there remains a lot of challenges and gaps in existing approaches, and these are also some of the shortcomings that the Thristy Cities project will address. So, for example, providing a clear picture of exactly how much water comes into the system, how much is lost, how much is used, what is it used for, how much is stored. And then we will also consider urban green strategies and adaptation measures. Are they feasible? Are they cost effective? And then, of course, raising awareness and integrating adaptation measures and drought resilience strategies into the existing urban environment. So just to add to another slide that we will address within the project, at the Hanse, we use ClimateCafe workshops, both online, like today, as well as comprehensive in-person workshops, together with ClimateScan to produce both short-term outputs as well as fulfill long-term objectives of our projects. And this includes stakeholder participation, co-designing workshops, raising awareness, and interdisciplinary collaboration. So one of the approaches in Thristy Cities include collaborative learning and productive interactions between its diverse range of consortium partners and external stakeholders, so that we can develop and validate knowledge that is not only scientifically robust, but also socially relevant. So you can see how both ClimateCafes and ClimateScan will contribute to these objectives and help connect Thristy Cities to societal issues and urban transitions. So from our side, we will contribute to the broader impacts and outcomes expected from the project in support of drought resilient urban areas. And this includes the provision of tools and actionable guidelines that can be used by municipalities for the planning, design, and development of drought resilient urban areas. It will also provide structure for local authorities to increasingly incorporate green and water sensitive design elements. Of course, the project is also focused on raising awareness, like I said, with citizen science approaches. And this also includes informing the community about droughts and its effects, making them aware of their role and responsibilities and understand how they can contribute. And then, of course, by building drought resilience and avoiding drought-related risks and associated damage to infrastructure, for instance, we also expect economic benefits. Yes, so that's all from me. You are also welcome to visit ClimateScan and see the drought projects or the relevant projects that also relates to Thristy Cities, as well as other climate adaptation strategies and measures. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sinead.
There we go.
Questions?
All right.
Can I ask, do you think that the future is bleak for green walls? Because we see examples of green walls in England that we just can't keep them alive unless you've got a really intense potable water pumped irrigation, which just seems to go against the whole thrust of SUDS. Do you think we'll see fewer of them, or whether we'll find a way to make them work?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we install them at the right time or so, I mean, I showed you the example in Cape Town that was just installed during a drought, which is crazy, and no drought resilient plants. So it needs to be done in a clever way where you have drought resilient plants, you have a constant source of water. And I think climate's going to have a lot to do with that. I mean, some things work in some areas and doesn't work in other areas. I haven't seen a lot of green walls in Cape Town working at all. Although we do have a lot of drought resilient vegetation, it's just not really something that's done. So I would like to say yes, green walls are here to stay because they are amazing and they give such a nice atmosphere, and they it's not just cooling and providing insulation to buildings. It's also visually very appealing, I would say. So I'm hoping we will find a way to make them more resilient in future.
Good. Yeah.
Sydney.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I really love the questions of Joe, because I almost wanted to ask the same thing, but maybe in a broader perspective, because I was wondering if we're already at the point with ClimateScan and other data that we can determine or say about the probability of a measure that's going to be successful. For another example is a permeable street. A lot of research has been done on that too. And the same thing, often the problem is when it's realized, when they go outside and make it and they do something wrong at the wrong time. Those are, for example, for that measure, it's considered a huge risk. And like for me, like designers or policymakers, that's we say, well, yeah, we can always try to improve something and tell people that they do it better. But right now, we're just choosing the things that have the least risk of going wrong, which is limiting, it reduces the options, which isn't fair, because a lot other things have a lot of potential, but the potential and the risk of going wrong. Do we already have like a kind of a database on that with ClimateScan?
I don't think in terms of really what's going to go wrong. I mean, ClimateScan, there's a lot of measures in terms of climate adaptation measures that's already been implemented. And like I said, there is some projects that shows the problem. But I think it's very much dependent on it's project specific. So it's not a very wide kind of approach. You need to look at the specifics of a green wall. I mean, where is it located? And I think very much we need to look at maintenance. I think that is a very big problem, because engineers, for instance, I mean, I come from a civil engineering background. I know how it works. They don't want to build something that's going to take a lot of maintenance effort over a long period of time. They would rather build something a concrete structure that's going to last for 100 years and there's nothing that needs to be done, versus a nature-based solution that does need, I mean, permeable paving doesn't just require no maintenance. It needs to be cleaned, otherwise it's going to get clogged and things like that. So I think we need to up maintenance requirements. That needs to be specified more directly, and then also look at it more in terms of project specific and not in general.
Yeah, so more maintenance will reduce the problems, for many measures.
Well, yeah, not always. I mean, like I said, it's again project specific, but then if you have a lot of maintenance, it has an economic impact on the other hand. So we need to find a good balance, I think, between green and grey. Yeah. Reinder.
Thanks.
Very brief reaction to Sydney. You mentioned the risk when applying permeable pavements. I know that there are risks, especially regarding stormwater flooding. However, how big is it of a problem if you look at this from the perspective of drought and groundwater recharge?
Yeah, that's a good reaction.
Yeah.
That was actually I kept myself from reaction because I didn't want to take over the whole discussion. But as like Shanae said, it's the balance, and it's the balance with the benefits that you reach from them. Exactly that the green walls are a nice example how important Is it that you get this extra cooling of the billion, this extra biodiversity, extra shade? That's how you determine like if you really want something. We are building stuff in cities, also here in Nijmegen, on places where almost no water goes. And we're trying to catch all the water, put it in basins, keep it, and pump it up again for greenery near a public area in front of the train station, for example, because we really, really, really want it there. And then measures become more economically feasible and more attractive. And then there's also more money for maintenance.
Yeah.
The actual question that I had was, of course, for Shanae. You showed a lot of pictures of experiments where you do measurements. You also mentioned the effectiveness of measures. Are you also going to do something about that in this project to see how effective measures are for drought mitigation?
Yes, well, we're not just starting something from new. We have a lot of existing data that we also will incorporate into the project. And yes, that does include looking at how effective measures are, particularly in terms of storing water and making sure that there is provision of water sources for droughts during wet periods, because we, of course, not looking at floods, but like I said also in my presentation, they go hand in hand. So how do we find a good solution for floods while maintaining solutions for droughts? So providing something that is resilient and that can provide solutions for different kinds of problems in terms of climate change. Yes. So yes, we will be using and testing and comparing and monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of measures throughout the project.
You're still having a bit of the overview because you're looking at so many different measures and techniques.
Yes. We have compiled a bit of a comparison between the case study areas, looking at what measures we have where. So of course it would be wise to compare apples with apples kind of thing and not look at different measures in different areas, but trying to compare in the same measures in different areas.
Okay, looking forward. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, well, we're just on time. We are
Yeah.
a minute before 5:30. So in terms of next week, we have our third and last episode of the Thristy Cities series. And during this ClimateCafe, we will hear from Miriam Koenders from the Delft University of Technology, Jeroen Schoonderbeek van Wageningen University of Research, and Lara Wolle from University of Twente. And they will tell us about water quality and water quantity. So hoping everybody will attend again next week, and then we hope to see you then.
Yeah, one question about it. Would it will be in English again?
Yes, as
All right.
far as I remember, Floris mentioned it will be in English.
Yeah, I also already thought so. So then we're gonna see you again, also again, Joe Barty. Oh, you're muted.
I'm not sure about next Tuesday, but I will definitely try very hard. And I will share it on my LinkedIn again, because I think there are lots of other British practitioners who would find this really useful.
Great.
Great.
All right.
Well, yes.
Till
Excellent.
next week.
Thank you.
Well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Stop recording.